Thank you, Madam President. I move adoption of the amendment, waive the reading, and seek to summarize.
Motion on adoption. Will you remark, sir?
So we've talked a lot. Thank you, Madam President. We've talked a lot tonight about how the underlying bill would affect the private sector, would affect our schools, municipalities. What I think we also need to look to include are our own state employees. And the Hartford Courant reported recently that you can rape someone on the job as a state employee and still be eligible for your state pension. A man is in prison for raping 2 severely disabled women. One was quadriplegic, the other was blind, and both were unable to speak. He did this for years while working at the State Department of Developmental Services group home, yet he's still eligible for a pension. This is a very serious crime, a crime that Senator Flexer referred to in her comments just moments ago under Statute 53-70A. And what this amendment would do is add on to the existing language, I guess you can say strengthening the bill, and it would allow for the Attorney General to apply to the Superior Court, or it would require the Attorney General to apply to the Superior Court for an order to revoke the state pension to which such person is otherwise entitled under the general statutes for service as a state public official or state employee. In other words, this would allow for us to revoke the pension of a state employee who commits aggravated sexual assault. Yes, the crime that was referred to earlier is a very serious crime. I think this is a logical addition to this bill, and I would urge the Chamber's support. Thank you.
Will you remark further? Will you remark on this amendment? Will you remark on the amendment? Senator Fasano?
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I rise to support the amendment. This definitely would be a position in which we would say that that type of behavior not only is not tolerated, but as a state, we're not going to compensate folks who do such a heinous act. So, Madam President, I look forward to its passage.
Senator Whitgos?
Thank you, Madam President. I also rise to support the amendment. I refer back to the conversations that were just had a few minutes ago, and I think this is something that every single resident of Connecticut would agree with, that it's great public policy we do this. And because of that, I ask when the vote be taken by roll.
Roll call vote will be taken. Will you remark? Senator Doyle?
Thank you, Madam President. After reviewing the amendment, I urge the Chamber to approve this amendment. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Will you remark further? Will you remark further? Senator Duff?
Thank you, Madam President. On the amendment, I have a question for the proponent of the amendment, please.
Please proceed, sir.
Thank you, Madam President. To the proponent of the amendment, I think we all would agree that this is an amendment that is worth consideration, though I am wondering if, based on contractual law, and I'm no lawyer, but based on a pension as a contract, it's not something that is just given to somebody. Would this be a legal means to remove a pension from somebody based on a crime that is committed?
Senator Linares?
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Senator Duff, for that question. This would require the Attorney General to order to revoke the state pension, and it would ask the Superior Court to review that claim, and it would also ask that in determining whether the pension shall be revoked or reduced, the Superior Court shall consider and make findings based on a series of factors. Through you, Madam President.
Senator Duff.
Thank you, Madam President, and thanks to the Senator for the answer. Though I think we would agree, well, do we agree, through you, Madam President, that a pension is a contract?
Senator Linares.
Yes, Madam President, and it is a contract. And in 2008, we changed a similar contract for elected officials who commit financial crimes, and we would like to broaden this bill so that it would be for people who commit aggravated sexual assault. So we've seen legal precedent with this before, Senator Duff, and I think that since we're able to do it for financial crimes, we should be able to do it for aggravated sexual assault. Through you, Madam President.
Senator Duff.
Thank you, Madam President. And again, I'm no lawyer, I'm just a country legislator. But it was my recollection that when that law was passed, it was passed because of a series of corruption incidences in the state, and that when the law was passed, it was challenged in court right away. And that once it was deemed a contract, it could only be prospective. Is that your recollection of the case law, Senator?
Senator
Through you, Madam
Linares.
President?
Thank you, Madam President. I too, Senator, am just a country legislator, not an attorney. I think my neck of the woods is a bit more country than yours is, but my understanding is that if it was good enough for us to pass the law for financial crimes, then it should be good enough for us to pass a law for aggravated sexual assault, and that the Attorney General should have this responsibility incumbent upon them, and that I would hope that the Superior Court would be able to rule fairly and accordingly. Through you, Madam President.
Senator Duff.
Thank you, Madam President. And I don't think anybody's arguing with the intent of what you're trying to do or doesn't see a justification for the amendment, though remind me or help me, was when there was a court case, did the judge rule that it could only be prospective rather than somebody who is a current employee? Through you, Madam President.
Senator Linares.
Well, through you, Madam President, Senator Duff, I was not here in 2008 in the chamber like you were. I do not know, but I do know that at the time the Attorney General, who was a Democrat at the time, was advocating to make sure that aggravated sexual assault, if an employee committed aggravated sexual assault on the job as a state employee, they could not acquire their pension in retirement. So it seems like it was a bipartisan idea then, and it seems like it's a good bipartisan idea now. Through you, Madam President.
Senator Duff.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Senator. I think everybody here in the circle supported the bill, but the case wasn't tried in the circle. The case was tried in court, and I believe the Attorney General at the time, who is now our senior U.S. Senator, was also in favor of the bill. So again, let's not assume that the questions are because of the opposition to an amendment. Trying to get to whether or not somebody was here or not here at that time, the case law of this type of an amendment that has been cited by the proponent, whether or not this is something that will hold up in court based on previous case law. It is my assumption, if I am correct, that while we may all support this because we don't want to, we want to make sure that anybody who is accused of sexual assault or sexual crimes are punished accordingly, that this, if challenged, would have a hard time being held up in court for one, because pensions are contracts, and that it can only, to change a pension, since it is a contract, can only be prospective only. So therefore, if somebody has a pension and they're charged with this crime, the odds of them actually losing their pension are probably slim based on case law, and that that if somebody were then hired as a state employee, they could never lose their pension because they would then they wouldn't have committed the crime yet. So to me, while I think that we all understand this amendment and we understand that it's well-meaning, I'm just, for legislative intent, trying to put on the floor here whether or not this would be held up in court, for one, and two, based on previous case law, if this would be one that would be held up in court, because it is one of the arguments that's being used by the proponent is based on what we have done in the past, based on other corruption cases, which, again, were very bad. And I supported taking away a corrupt public official's pension, as I would support taking away somebody who is charged with these crimes, taking away their pension too. Though we pass laws here, and sometimes across the street they are overturned. And my concern is that that will be the case as well. Now, maybe this is written differently. Maybe we have new justices. They will see it differently. But I understand in the legal world, they do look at cases from the past that and then may determine what their decisions will be in the future. So, Madam President, I just wanted to bring up these issues. And just one other question, if I can, to the proponent of
Please proceed, sir.
the amendment, is that while, again, we passed the first bill 32-4, then the second amendment 18-18, we have this amendment now. Can you speculate, Senator, as to why this was not in the last amendment, why this is on its own? If
Senator
it seems like to be
Linares?
such an important issue for the caucus. Thank you.
Sorry. Senator Linares.
We are raising this amendment now, Senator, because it's good policy and it's something that we should do. And I think that we should advocate for, if a situation like this needs to go to court, should see its time in court. And we shouldn't be afraid whether or not it will be held up. And we should stand up for people that are victims of aggravated sexual assault. And we shouldn't just do it for people that are in the private sector or victims or people who are, we should do it for everyone, and that includes holding our own state employees accountable. We shouldn't be afraid of doing that. Through you, Madam President.
Senator Duff.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate your answer. And Madam President, I just want to conclude by saying that if we were truly concerned about passing the toughest bill on this issue, we should have passed Amendment A, as we did, in a bipartisan, overwhelming fashion, and then voted again and left. And here we are on Amendment C, continuing on this journey from a very strong bill to then voting on a very weak bill to then voting on a one-off amendment. So it is my opinion that if we are arguing that we should have the strongest laws in the state, we should have voted for the Amendment A, and then everybody could have said thank you for a lot of hard work that went into this, and we'd all be on the road by now. So I would certainly urge people to consider that when we may do other amendments as well. And I want to thank again the Senator for his answers. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Will you mark further? Senator Boucher.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, I rise in very strong support of this particular amendment. This was an outrage, what occurred here. It's a heinous crime, and the public would be staunchly behind this. In fact, that's what we hear when we're out in the district, that somehow that the government class is often protected by things that outrages the general public. And I think this addresses a wrong and it's something the public would be strongly behind. And it's disappointing that any motivations could be questioned by anyone bringing out an amendment in this circle. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Schlossberg.
Good morning, Madam President. I too rise for the record in regard to this the amendment before us, and without a doubt share the concern of the members of the circle with regard to the underlying issue. However, for the record, I would just note that in 2008 this body passed legislation which originated in the GAE committee, of which I was the chairman. Section 1-110A is our pension revocation law. The intent then, when it was passed, and the language now, which currently stands as our current law, says that if any public official or state or municipal employee is convicted or pleads guilty or nolo contendere to any crime related to state or municipal office in state or federal criminal court, then the AG can go into the office, go in and seek pension revocation under a variety of different findings that they had that the court will have to make. When we passed this legislation, the intent was to address any state or municipal employee or public official who was acting at work and was then convicted of a crime. It was not limited. It was limited as prospective when the bill was passed, because the belief at that time was that it would be unconstitutional to look backward. And yes, it was to address crimes of corruption initially, but it was drafted and passed by this body on a broad basis with the idea that if somebody uses their public job to commit a crime and they are convicted of it, that a judge could then consider whether they should revoke their pension. This amendment language, I apologize, is a little new to me, and I want to sit down and just read it again before we cast a vote, whenever that's going to happen, because I'm concerned that to the extent that the language in this amendment proposed cites to specific crimes, we may actually be limiting the existing language of our statute, which I don't believe is anyone's intent. So just for the record, I wanted to make sure that we clarified. Thank you.
Thank you. Will you mark further? Will you mark further? Senator Flexer.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise for a few remarks on the amendment and then some questions to the proponent. The information that Senator Schlossberg just shared with us, I think, is something we ought to think about very carefully and make sure that, as I believe was happening in Senate Amendment B, there were many unintended consequences and weakening of the law that was in that proposal, which I'm grateful this chamber rejected. Based on what Senator Schlossberg just said, I am concerned that perhaps what's before us in Senate C, which I was initially inclined to support, might also result in a weakening of our existing law. And I would not want us to rush and make a bad choice just because this looks good at first glance. And I certainly believe that the proponents' intentions here are good at addressing this very serious issue that the proponent highlighted. But I would not want to, again, limit a current law that may be stronger. But to the proponent of the amendment, Senator Schlossberg just talked about someone abusing their public position. In this amendment, is it your intent to go after someone who abuses their public position to commit these crimes? Through you, Madam President.
Senator Linares.
Through you, Madam President, this certainly does not weaken the underlying bill. It explicitly strengthens the underlying bill. And that is very clear. I would recommend that the good senator reads the bill, and I think it can be as clear as day that this suggests, and this would require, that we would revoke the pension of state employees who commit aggravated sexual assault. And if the current if the current statute is what we need to fall back on, then why is Alice Hagstrom, who has raped 2 women, severely disabled women, a quadriplegic, one was blind, why, if that is the case, if you would like to use our current law, why is this man still eligible for a pension? Through you, Madam President.
Senator Flexa?
Through you, Madam President, I believed I asked a question that was not answered.
Would you like to repeat your question?
Through you,
Yeah,
Madam
it's-
President, that was an answer.
Through you,
Senator
Madam President, my question was, does this amendment that's before us address someone committing these crimes by abusing their public position?
Senator Linares.
This amendment is an add-on to the underlying amendment, which would, as described earlier, anyone who is a public official or state municipal employee who is convicted or pleads guilty to a crime related to state or municipal office in state criminal or federal criminal court of a aggravated sexual assault under 53A-70A. Clearly, to me, this language is as clear as day that this is clearly a state employee who commits aggravated sexual assault. The Attorney General shall apply to the Superior Court to revoke their pension. This is clearly written. And so I hope that answers the good senator's question, Madam President.
Senator Flexa?
Thank you, Madam President. And Madam President, I think that there's a slight misunderstanding here. I am certainly not questioning the motivations of the proponent of the amendment. I think I acknowledge that he's trying to address a serious issue. But I do take exception to the notion that I have not read this amendment, because I have, and that is why I'm asking questions about it. And I'm just trying to get to whether or not the proponent believes that this amendment goes at public officials who abuse their public position to commit sexual assault crimes.
Senator Linares?
Yes, Madam President.
Senator Flexa?
Thank you, Madam President. And Madam President, I would ask the proponent of the amendment, why is this proposal limited to sections 53A-70 and 53A-70A?
Senator Linares?
Madam President, this is specifically identifying aggravated and first-degree sexual assault because, number one, it was the example that we've seen from the Hartford Courant, which has outraged many of our constituents, and number two, because we believe that this would make progress in our current statutes, which clearly are allowing for convicted rapists like this to still get the coverage of state contracts and their pensions, which I I can't understand why anyone wouldn't want to make that change. Through you, Madam President.
Senator Flexer.
Through you, Madam President, I don't believe that anyone is suggesting that this change should not be made. I'm just trying to get a better understanding, first of all, again, to ensure that what Senator Schlossberg has suggested as a concern, that what we're doing here does not weaken current law, and also, frankly, unlike the components of this bill, the underlying bill that were adopted in Senate A, that had extensive public hearings and discussion, this amendment that's before us did not have a public hearing, and perhaps if it had, the good senator might have been inclined to include other serious felony sexual assault crimes. And I wonder if the proponent could explain to me why we're not addressing sexual assault in the second degree, which in our current statute in 53A-71B could include where the victim is a person who is placed or receiving services under the direction of the Commissioner of the Department of Developmental Services in any public or private facility. And the actor, the perpetrator of the crime, has supervisory or disciplinary authority over other such person.
Senator Linares.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you to the good senator for her questions. These are the two most heinous crimes on the books, and it also pertains directly to a current event and current situation that has been reported to our constituents through the Hartford Current. And so that is why we are directly trying to handle that problem as it relates to those statutes. Through you, Madam President.
Senator Flexer.
Through you, Madam President. When we read headlines about horrific stories like the one that has led us to this discussion on this amendment this evening, we have to take those things seriously. And I know that that is why the proponent of this amendment has drafted this proposal and moved forward with it. However, we also can't just be having knee-jerk reactions and not looking more broadly. Again, I'm just concerned that this proposal is not looking at the broader set of felony crimes where someone in a public role, again, like I just detailed in the last section of the statute, the last felony crime, who is in a supervisory role over another person and commits this sort of crime. I can't understand why we wouldn't want to include that as well. Through you, Madam President.
Senator Linares.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you for your question. You asked why this idea wasn't brought to the conversation earlier. The article was brought out on April 25th, was published April 25th, 2018, so several weeks back. It's come to my attention not too long ago that this was an issue, and I didn't know it was an issue until then. Secondly, I think that, if a state employee, I think what you're referring to is statutory rape, if a state employee was to sleep with their intern, or as an example, that is something that we can certainly handle later on and have public hearings on in the next legislative session. But in this case, this is an issue that we're dealing with currently, and I think that we should solve this problem today. Through you, Madam President.
Senator Flexer.
Through you, Madam President. Just one final question. Has this amendment been offered on any other bill that has to do with sexual assault this year, or is it only on this bill?
Senator Linares.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Senator Flexer, would you repeat the question, please?
Has this amendment been offered on any other bill that has to do with sexual assault this year, or has it only been introduced on this bill?
So
Senator Linares.
thank you, Madam President. Through you, and again, to the good senator, it is getting late, so I apologize for making you repeat your question. But again, the article breaking this story came out on April 25th, and this is the first bill. However, it can be amended to many others, I imagine, that are germane to this topic through Madam President.
Senator Flexer.
Thank you, Madam President.
Will you remark further? Senator Duff.
Thank you, Madam President. Can we stand at ease for a moment, please?
Sure. Let's stand at ease. I'm sorry. Senator Duff?
Thank you, Madam President. We'll come back and debate. I guess we're still on Amendment C, Madam President.
Okay. Okay, anybody have anything to say? If not, Mr. Clerk, let's call a roll call vote, and the machine will be open on Senate C.
Immediate roll call has been ordered in the Senate on Senate Amendment Schedule C. Immediate roll call has been ordered in the Senate.
I ask both of the senators in the chamber to please vote. One more, Senator. Thank you. All members have voted. The machine will be closed. Mr. Clerk, will you call the tally?
On Senate Amendment Schedule C, total number voting 36, those voting yea 30, those voting nay 6, absent not voting 0.
The amendment passes. Will you mark for